Do different races have different IQs? Alt-right flaw. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and I was just watching Mouthy Buddha's videos about the alt-right that everybody has been talking about so much, and while I think he's a smart guy with mammoth production quality, I realized I have something to add to this conversation. The point I am making is something similar to what a few people I know have made, namely Based Mama, Wizard of Cause, and Jeff Holiday. But of course, in true Prince of Queens fashion, I will illustrate my point with stories from my own life. Because as Mark Twain so famously said, there are lies, damned lies, and statistics. So, what's my problem with the concept of races having different IQs? Well, it's mainly just about the flaws in IQ tests themselves, which I have yet to see somebody do a super great job explaining in thorough enough detail. But let me back this up. One thing I agree with Laughing Buddha about is that the leaders of the alt-right movement actually do take science into account, and we need to give them their dues in that regard. They really aren't like feminists in the way that they say, gender is a social construct, because reasons. It's not scientifically provable, because theory. Rather, race realism does have pros and cons, as much as I hate saying that as somebody who is vehemently anti-racist. Simply put, regardless of whether the following things are true or not universally, I have had numerous Asian people say to my face that Asian people are, in fact, bad drivers. I've heard numerous black people admit that black people are bad swimmers. And as a white person, we all know white people don't age particularly well. When we get into territory of saying that there are zero differences between various skin colors and genetic groupings of people, we do face the risk of being rather anti-science to a certain degree. Though at the same time, I've studied a bit of genetics, and it's one of those fields where the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Regardless, when it comes to IQ, which is supposed to measure intelligence, how accurate is this two-word phrase, intelligence quotient, when it comes to successfully predicting how generally smart and good at doing the important stuff people need to do to make the world go round somebody actually will be? How important are these standardized tests where somebody fills in bubbles? Sure, a lot of politically correct leftist type people will initially jump into saying that there are various different forms of intelligence, which I definitely think is true to some degree because I'm an ace when it comes to arguing, but I'm absolute shit when it comes to fitting various items into a box, or what they call spatial intelligence. Still, some people are just smarter than others overall. But more so, as a response, people who are a bit more fond of race realism are apt to say that IQ really is the most accurate prediction of how well somebody will likely do in schooling and their careers as an individual. And again, that might be true, but here's the problem as I see it. When we talk about IQ, I think the main elephant in the room that we should get out of the way before we have the conversation is that the people who are going to be likely to praise the validity of IQ tests are probably going to be people who have done relatively well when they've taken them in the past. Ultimately, it's pretty easy to say that something matters when it's something that you possess, which in my case would mean that I should theoretically be defending the hell out of the motherfucking IQ tests, because I've done really fucking well at them in the past. And trust me, I've done this. I've bragged about my intelligence, citing IQ tests as an example. However, after a while you grow up and you get a bit less full of yourself, and you start thinking about the different factors that were involved in doing well in these types of tests. I'll use myself as an example. When I was a small child, I wasn't paid attention to a whole bunch by my family, for reasons I don't want to get into. However, due to my family not being poor financially, my parents placed an exceeding amount of their pride on whether or not my sisters and I were intelligent. Sure, I didn't often have my parents actively engaging with me as a young child, but I certainly had them pressuring me into doing things like taking cello lessons starting at age 5, and then a massive slew of supposedly intelligence building puzzle games and problem solving books that they gave me to keep me out of their hair. Furthermore, my dad was a computer scientist who was also completely okay with me playing video games, because although my mother was skeptical of it, as she saw it as yet another form of television, which she was against, my father realized what people know now, which is that video games teach kids problem-solving skills. By the time I was 5 or 6, I was so used to doing things like looking at a diagram of various different points and numbers and then systematically figuring out how to reduce said diagram into as few different intersecting points and numbers as possible. I was so used to that stuff that when I was finally given an official IQ test in the 2nd grade, I tore that shit up like Conor McGregor against Eddie Alvarez. Not only was I prepared to look at the various different shapes and numbers and accurately fill in the bubble that said which one was closest in replicating the original shape and numbers that I was supposed to compare it to. Not only did I have practice solving the puzzle, but I had already been conditioned to enjoy tackling that sort of mathematical puzzle, as well as knowing it would please my parents if I did well. So when I took the standardized test, I sat down behind that sheet of paper like a little demon, blocking out the rest of what was going on around me in that room, because I had basically done the same thing for years at home when I had been solving puzzles that my mom had given me or ignoring my family while I played video games. Not surprisingly, I tested as some sort of child genius and was put into the gifted program that was 2 years or more ahead of one's grade level for the next year of my elementary school education. But am I really that smart? Sure, I'm not fucking stupid, but I imagine that overall, I'm not as smart as maybe I think I am. Doing well at an early age has also given me a major amount of hubris, however you fucking say it, over my peers. See, I can't even pronounce every word. Because when looking back on it, some of my peers were quite smart, but I didn't give them proper credit. So then I have to think about it. What was it like for the kids in my class who had never taken that kind of test before? Did they look at the page of puzzle problems and have to give it a shot for the very first time in their lives? They probably had never done such a test. More so, what was it like for kids that didn't have parents who were completely and utterly convinced that their children had to be some of the smartest kids in every class that they were in, and therefore highly pressured them to try really hard on such tests? I mean, if you are a kid who came from a single-parent household whose mother was simply happy that you weren't going outside and throwing rocks at other little kids, or if you were the child of a goddamn drug addict, if you were either of these things, even if you had great genes, how likely would it be that your motherfucking teacher in school is gonna give you yet another boring-ass test full of a bunch of difficult mathematical type puzzle questions, and you are actually going to sit there and do your best to solve these problems? Maybe, just maybe, if you were a kid that was never expected to be smart, and you're 8 years old, and somebody gave you a paper full of complicated puzzle questions designed to prove that you are smart, maybe, just maybe, you wouldn't even try to solve those puzzles because you'd rather just wait for the time to run out and go outside to play. That's what I think people really need to keep in mind. I can't say for certain that race realism has no basis in reality because I simply don't know. But I certainly can say that trying to coerce small children into doing stuff that over half of them probably don't even want to do is not a surefire way of proving whether or not they are capable of doing that thing. Imagine it like this. If you were a small child and somebody told you to climb a rock, like a climbing rock wall, and they said that you could do it if you wanted to, but also said that you could just sit there and not climb the rock if you didn't want to, what would you likely do? Sure, some kids might have had parents that pressured them into climbing rocks all the time at home, or they might just enjoy climbing rocks. The same way my parents, and probably many Asian parents, commonly pressure their kids into solving puzzles when they are little, or playing video games. But of course, there's always going to be kids who have never tried climbing the rock wall. And when you tell them that trying to climb the rock wall is simply optional, the way trying hard on a standardized test is always optional, well, a lot of kids just won't even try. So, are IQ tests a good metric for measuring somebody's future success in life? Absolutely. And another thing that will predict future success in life is having parents that are extremely engaged in raising you and getting you to be good at taking such tests and having general discipline. But how much do the tests really test for intelligence? And how much do they test discipline? So when you think of it like that, when you think about the tangible metrics of gathering the IQ data, it will always be flawed. You have to remember that not every little ass kid is actually going to try hard when they take their damned IQ test. Drop me a comment, spread this video to the race realists you know if you like it. Be like these people so I can keep making videos and hopefully buy a new computer. Ask me for my PayPal if you want to donate that way, and stay tuned.